Good afternoon. Another fine, frigid, gelid Sunday here in Flint, Michigan, the former home of Auto World. That should earn for it lifelong renown, if nothing else. Anyways, welcome to another episode of The Real Thomas Jefferson. You know me, I'm Andrew Holochak, Thomas Jefferson scholar, author of 28 books on Thomas Jefferson, over 70 books, and currently working on just finished a 780-page history of the Ukraine titled Ukraine, the Deep Roots of a Young Nation. Very proud of that book, and I'm throwing it out and revising it still and fishing for publishers at this point. We'll let you know what goes on with that. Anyways, today I want to talk to you about Jefferson's relationship to his daughters. Now, he had a rather strained relationship in many respects with at least one daughter, possibly both daughters, even though he had three daughters at the time. One died very young. So I'm going to get into that. The title of this episode is Jefferson and His Daughters Did Mary Feel Neglected? I don't know if I like the title so much, but the relationship, as I'm going to show here, between his two daughters was markedly different. I'll try to explain why. Very interested in psychoanalytic interpretation of historical figures. In my book on Ukraine, I talk about Joseph Stalin. I do a psychoanalytic analysis of Stalin. I do one as well of Vladimir Putin, go through his childhood and what we know of him and his speeches and talk about that. I want to do a little bit of that on Thomas Jefferson. I do that with Thomas Jefferson in my book, Thomas Jefferson's Psychobiography of an American Lion. It's a fantastic book, inordinately expensive, however, so it's only going to be of limited access to most people. But anyways, most people recognize that Jefferson was a good father. Almost all his historians, biographers of Jefferson, acknowledge that insofar as Jefferson could have been a good father, for one who was involved in the American Revolution, for one who was involved in nation building after the success of the American Revolution. Now, Jefferson had three children, Martha, Mary, and Lucy Elizabeth. Lucy Elizabeth died just after, while she was close to 3 years old, at Francis and Elizabeth Epps Eppington. Jefferson was in Paris at the time, and I'll explain what happened, why that happened. He exchanged, because he was involved in political events and held political offices most of his life. Jefferson oftentimes was separated from his daughters, whom he loved very much, and he corresponded with them as much as time allowed. And a study of those letters revealed quite some interesting things. When you do an historical figure like Thomas Jefferson, you have to do the dirty work. You have to look at things to understand his relationship to his daughters. You have to look at the number of letters, the differences in age, where the daughters were located at the time, differences of age, um, the intimacy of the correspondence with each, the length of the letters, how many letters were written, how frequently were letters exchanged and written, and so forth. And so you really have to do quite a bit of dirty work to get an understanding of his relationship between the two. And hopefully I've done that, and I can have something to say about the difference in his relationship with each. Okay. Now, right off the bat, I'll just say his relationship with Mary Jefferson, the youngest one, was strained. All right, let's say some things about daughter Martha. She was born in 1772, right? She went with Jefferson to Paris when Jefferson went to Paris in 1784 when she was 12. Mary stayed home. She was too young. She was, I think, 6 years old at the time. All right, Martha was called, named after his wife. Obviously, she's called Patsy. You know, Jefferson had these pet names for his two daughters, Patsy for Martha and Polly for Mary. Um, Let me see if I can bring up a picture of Mary. I do have one on. Okay, here we have a picture of her. Make it larger, right? And this was by Thomas Sully, and Sully could be a brilliant painter at times, and I think at other times his portrait a very famous portrait of Thomas Jefferson, I don't like at all. I think the proportions are questionable and so forth. But here we have, I think, a very, very fine piece by Thomas Sully, and it shows Martha Jefferson. She was not um, gorgeous by any means. She, in fact, looked much like Thomas Jefferson in that I think she could say she was tall, she was sort of thin, she was gangly, she was awkward, she was high intelligence like her father. She was a devoted mother to her 11 children. She had 12, and 11 of which um, made it to adulthood. So, I shared this portrait of her. You can see she's not unattractive. She's not attractive. She's not prepossessing, but she's not unprepossessing either. So uh, and with that there. And let's see. All right. So when Jefferson goes to Paris in 1784, she comes with Thomas Jefferson. He had to take his oldest daughter with her. They stay in the convent, a certain Catholic convent just to the west, a little west of the main part of the city, at the main island of the city, and south of the River Seine. And let me see if I can bring up a picture. Part of my book on Jefferson. Um, I see if I have it here. I have a map of Paris, and I think this is not the one I want, so I'll close that one. It's not the map I want. I'll try to bring up the one I do want because I did mark it off to make it easily. And if this doesn't work, I'll just show you anyways where they're. Yeah, here we go. Um, all right, here we have a map of Paris of the 18th century, and the full picture up as it comes up, and I'll show you just where. Right here, the purple dot is Jefferson's Hotel Languedoc, right? You can see from the main part of the city, these yellow walls, were the second walls of the second Paris, and then we have orange walls and red walls for a fourth Paris, and then the blue walls here indicate Paris of Jefferson's day. And Jefferson is at the west northwest outskirts of the city, right where that purple dot is. Um, the convent right here, at which his two daughters stayed, Martha first and then Mary later, when she arrives later in 1786, is located just south of the river, again to the west of the outskirts of an older version of Paris. So they weren't separated by too many kilometers, right? And I just want to give you when I wrote my book on Jefferson, I had access to old maps of Paris, and it was quite a bit of fun just to sort of relive the events of Jefferson's life by following how these events might have played out on these old maps, and then looking at pictures of buildings as far as you can. And it was a bit of fun for me, I admit. And yeah, so I think part of you know being a student, that sort of dirty work. You have to go to the old maps and see where Jefferson lived. That was Jefferson's second residence, by the way. His first was just north of the main part of Paris, north of the river Seine. Um, Now, Martha would marry and have 12 children, 11 of whom survived into adulthood. She was a great she was a great mother, and she was so loyal to Thomas Jefferson. Now, when Jefferson and she get back to Virginia in 1789, after his tenure in Paris of 5 years plus years, um, she immediately marries, right? It's a strange sort of thing. Um, and why? Um, she marries Thomas Randolph Jr. on February 23, 1790 at Monticello. Why does she get married so quickly? Well, she knew him and presumably they were in love. But there's a very interesting episode that occurs in at the convent at which Jefferson's daughters were staying in 1789 during the last year. And Martha relates to Thomas that she wants to become a nun. Now, Jefferson was assured when they were schooled at the convent that there would be no proselytizing, no attempt to convert, just giving his daughters a sound education. And Jefferson was placated by that. He had to get some strings pulled for him by his friends in France just to get them in such an esteemed school. But she says she wants to become a nun. Now, why is that? Very interesting psychologically. What that tells me is that Jefferson's not spending enough time with the daughters. She had to know that especially would piss off Thomas Jefferson. Um, Jefferson immediately yanks his daughters from school and has them stay their remaining days of that last year in Paris with him at Hotel Languedoc. That had to be, in some sense, a statement, confession. Thomas, you're not dad, you're not spending enough time with me. As we saw um, in a biography, Fawn Brody's biography, Thomas Jefferson, Brody has a Thomas speaking of his sexual appetite for his daughter, Martha, just by a misreading, a psychoanalytic misreading one of the letters. I addressed that in an earlier video, and I think that's just scholarly and responsible by people to sell a lot of books. Anyways, she marries Thomas Mann Randolph Jr. in 1790, not long after they get back. And she would be at the beck and call of her father throughout her life, even though they would have their own house not too far away. Thomas Mann Randolph would build a house close by to Monticello. But upon their return, Jefferson's end of tenure as president, she would live and her children would live with Jefferson at Monticello. There would be a large strain in the relationship between Martha and her husband, Thomas, and you can understand why. And Thomas Mann Randolph probably felt, hey, I have to live up to the uh, to the high profile of Thomas Jefferson. Right? He would be his son-in-law would be governor of Virginia and would be part of the Virginia legislature. But he had some tall boots to fill. He took the drinking, and there was a great problem. There were great problems with the relationship. Now, Mary, she's born in 1778, was significantly younger than her, was it 6 years younger than her older sister? Yeah, 6 years younger. And she was called Polly. We don't have any pictures of her, but descriptions tell us she was much like Thomas's wife, Martha. She was short, pretty, of frail health, like her mother. But unlike her mother, she wasn't always occupied with significant tasks to do. She was indolent. She was lazy. And Jefferson would send so many different letters to her and warn her of her indolence, of her laziness, of her slothfulness. Um, Anyway, she would marry in 1797 John Wales Epps on October 13th of that year. Remember, she stayed at Eppington when Jefferson went to France in 1784. She stayed behind with her sister, Lucy Elizabeth, who gets whooping cough and dies after Jefferson leaves. And Mary was ill as well, and Jefferson's panicked. He thinks, what happens if my other daughter dies? And he insists that she comes. So she comes in 1786 with unexpectedly with Sally Hemings. Jefferson asked for an older slave woman to be her attendant, but the Epps sent Sally Hemings for some reason. That's never explained anywhere in the letters. Jefferson was astonished when no one older shows up with his daughter. But anyways, she marries, and they would have two children, only one of whom, Frances Epps, would survive to adulthood. Right? She would die at the age of 25. It's 1804, just like her mother, just after a difficult pregnancy and childbirth. Now, if we look at the letters between Jefferson and his daughters, they are very highly indicative of the sort of relationships he had with them. Right? Um, there's the incident of when Jefferson's wife dies in 1782, just prior to him accepting the position as minister plenipotentiary in France. And Martha, the daughter, the oldest daughter, talks of Thomas Jefferson's excessive grieving. She's astonished by it. She loved her mother tremendously, and she too grieved, but she talks about her father just grieving on and on and on. And he would go on his horse and go for long rides. And at some point, she says, I just became his companion on those rides. I couldn't love. She was probably afraid that he would do himself in. She writes, in those melancholy rambles, I was his constant companion, a solitary witness to many a burst of grief, the remembrance of which had consecrated particular scenes of that lost home beyond the power of time to obliterate. Right. So there clearly was, in spite of Brody's stupid claims that the letters indicate sexuality, not at least, but there clearly was an intimate bond between the two. They physically were alike. She was highly intelligent, as you can tell just by the way she writes. And those melancholy rambles, I was his constant companion, a solitary witness to many a burst of grief, the remembrance of which had consecrated particular scenes of that lost home beyond the power of time to obliterate. Writes beautifully, just like her father as well, and talks about the excessive grieving. Um, his grieving was, in a sense, hers. In a manner of speaking, she does become Jefferson's wife proxy, as it were. I say that not that there's any sort of sexuality involved or any hint of that anywhere, but she understands that her father, her famous father, needs a constant companion to replace his mother, and she wants to be that person. She would stay with him at Monticello when he gets back from the presidency in 1809. So they had a very close relationship. She becomes, in effect, the matriarch of Monticello. When her mother dies, Mary is 4, and she's really to Mary would be Maria by the time she comes back from Paris, and she was really just too young to register fully what happened. So, okay, so Martha gets married. She moves to the residence Verena in Enrico County with her husband, but she still makes these frequent trips to Monticello, and she's the matriarch of Monticello for her father. She takes care of Monticello while her father's away on political business. She would visit her father often while he's president in Washington, today D.C. And like I said, she after his retirement, she moves into Monticello with her large family, and Jefferson is overjoyed. And he fully expected Maria at the time to do the same. She would not. She stays with her husband away from Jefferson, refuses to, tacitly refuses at least to move in with Jefferson at Monticello. Now, letters to both daughters always indicate Jefferson's abhorrence of laziness, of indolence, right? He writes to Martha, May 21, 1787, a mind always employed is always happy. This is the true secret, the grand recipe of felicity. The idle are the only wretched. Idleness is evil. Jefferson was obsessively preoccupied with being engaged in some occupation of worth. He was inordinately industrious. And in some sense, you had to be in his day, especially during the cold and quiet wintry months. It was difficult to while away the hours, and Jefferson was utmostly industrious, right? Now, when Martha writes him, she ends her letters, and I give you some examples, assuring you of the sincerest affection of your loving child, she signs off. Another time, with the tenderest affection, and at still another time, with a tenderness not to be expressed. She loves him so tenderly, she can't express her love. Um, the letters to Mary are different. They are much fewer. They are always succinct. They're always short. Um, and Jefferson always complains to her of not getting enough letters from her, of her not answering his letters, and consequently, he writes to her less frequently because her responses are infrequent. He scolds her. On one instance, 1785, when she's at Eptington, he goes, I have not received a letter from you since I came to France. Now this is a year he's been in France and she's not written him once, and he's upset. In July 25, 1790, he tells Maria, I did not write to you, my dear Paul for Polly, last week because I was really angry at receiving no letter. I ascribe it at first to indolence, to your laziness, but the affection must be weak, which is so long overruled by that. Now, in spite of the fact that letters to Mary are less frequent, that are curt, they're short, they're scolding when Jefferson writes, and Mary writes back to him in with a certain cool, uh, with which he is somewhat uncomfortable, I should say. He would like to have more outward expressions of her love for him, and just doesn't get it. He writes to her in 1790. He's in New York at the time, working with George Washington as Secretary of State. It says April 11th, 1790, says to Maria, are you occupied? Write me a letter by the first post and answer me all these questions. The word this and these points to things after in a paragraph or sentence. Tell me whether you see the sun rise every day, how many pages a day you read in Don Quixote, should be Don Quixote, how far you advanced in him. Don Quixote, Cervantes' novel, was one of Jefferson's favorite novels. I thought he thought it was a work of profound morality, right? In reverse, as it were. The moral lessons were not to behave like Don Quixote, not to read so many books you're disengaged from the real world. So it was a great moral work, and it really was a work of genius. I love the book myself. How far you advance in him, whether you repeat a grammar lesson every day, what else you read, how many hours a day you sew, whether you have an opportunity of continuing your music, whether you know how to make a pudding yet, to cut a beefsteak, to sow spinach, or to set a hen. Now, these are a laundry list of sorts of needs, of questions to which he wants answers, and they all suggest the sort of things that should occupy a genteel Virginian woman, a young lady of Jefferson's day. A woman is supposed to be able to do all the things that need to be done in the house to oversee household affairs, right? A woman, an educated, genteel Virginian woman, is also to be schooled very well in, as much as she can in the fine arts, dancing, music, play a musical instrument to be able to sing, drawing, and things like that. And those were the sort of skills in the fine arts. Women were not supposed to be skilled in the other arts, the sciences, philosophy, and things like that. Those were presumed to be, at least by Jefferson and most men of his day, manly sort of subjects to pursue. Now, she writes off in her letters to Jefferson with what I think are rather bromidic expressions of affection. She writes, your most affectionate daughter, with tenderest affection and with sincerest affection. The word affection comes up. Never see the word love. Right? So we do have some superlatives, tenderest, sincerest, coupled with affection, but affection is a rather dull word, all things considered. Uh, why was Martha's relationship to her father was one of closeness, one of great intimacy. She needed to be around her father. She needed to be his second wife, as it were, when her mother dies, and she would almost ruin her relationship with Thomas Van Randolph just to be near to her father. One can understand that given the success of her father and just about everything he undertook. Um, Maria, her relationship with her father was cold. Now, why is that? I think it's very easy to understand. He saw very little of her as a child when he goes to France in 1784. She's sick now. And by the time, 5 years pass and so forth, she comes in 2.5 years later to be with him, but she's been away at 6. She hasn't seen her father in 2.5 years. They didn't have videos like Zoom. I'm on Zoom right now. So she could see her father. They didn't have photographs and things like that. And again, as I said, we don't have any paintings of her, strangely enough. She perhaps died much too young for anybody to do a portrait of her. Um, she had to be extremely jealous of Martha's relationship with her father. When Thomas Jefferson enjoined the Epps to send her, she resisted remarkably. I don't want to come to Paris. I want to stay with Auntie Epps and Uncle Epps and so forth. She didn't want to come, right? Um, so, with Martha being so close to Thomas, she had to be envious. Now, she had to really feel resentful over the fact that when Thomas Jefferson went to Paris, she was left behind with Lucy Elizabeth, right? So she adopted the Epps in some sense as her surrogate parents and sort of rejected Thomas as a father. Now, more than that, and this is something sort of astonishing, something that astonished Abigail Adams when her husband was in England, and when daughter Mary and Sally Hemings come over, they stop in England and they're met by Abigail Adams, right, at the port. And Abigail's astonished to see that Thomas Jefferson doesn't come, when the daughters are sent to Paris. Thomas Jefferson doesn't come to pick up his own daughter, doesn't leave behind his official duties. Perhaps it's because he spent so much time with Maria Cosway that he felt behind in his political duties, so he couldn't even come to pick up his daughter. That astonishes me. No matter what duties you have, I would think at whatever cost you put them aside and you come and personally come to greet your daughter when she arrives, in France to be taken to Paris. She arrives on the northern coast of France to be taken by coach to Paris. So that had to be stunning. Abigail Adams was flabbergasted. She didn't say much, but she said sort of elliptically, "Well, you couldn't even come pick up your own daughter," right? In a letter to Thomas Jefferson. So, and I agree with her. So that had to be a slight as well. So she first, right? She was very, very beautiful, and she wanted to be accepted probably as an intelligent woman, and she was not. She probably thought that people praise her because she's beautiful, but not for other things and so forth. Um, so she must have gone through her entire life feeling inadequate. The kicker is when she dies in 1804, Jefferson is not informed that she's ill after having given birth. And when he learns of her illness and her moribundity, it's too late. She dies and he doesn't get to visit her. She must have felt in those last days horribly abandoned by her father, who doesn't know of her profound sickness at the time. So, that said, I think it's easy to see why the relationship between Jefferson and Maria was cold and why the relationship between Jefferson and Martha was extremely warm. Um, and it's easy to understand why perhaps Martha didn't feel love for her father. She felt resentment. I think she did. And I think the resentment was indubitably justified because of Thomas Jefferson not spending enough time in some sense. I couldn't forgive Thomas for that. I mean, for gosh sakes, not even coming to pick up your daughter when she arrives in the northern coast of Paris and yourself take her by coach to your residence or take her to the Abbey Royal. He doesn't do that. So his relationship was certainly from not from his perspective. I think he loved each daughter equally. And I think those of you who are parents understand what I mean. You're taught, every parent probably always has a favorite child. You're taught never to communicate that, and rightfully so to any child. I don't have children, but I do have pets. And I have three cats and my dog, Jefferson Jackson. And I try not to show unequal, I do have my favorites, and I try not to show them because I think all the animals, like all children, need equal affection, need to show that they're loved. And the rewards of loving are decupled by the affection that your children show back. And for me, my animals show back. My dog Jeffy, whenever I'm gone anywhere, he barks all day, and it's not that often because I usually take him wherever I go. But I'm told by neighbors that if I go somewhere, he's barking and whining all the time. And on several occasions, when he found a way to get out of my house, he scoots out and he'll be 2 or 3 miles away. And I'll find out on Facebook somebody posts missing dog, and I get my dog back, but he just can't stand, right, Jeff? You just can't stand being away from me. I don't know why I can stand being away from me. But, anyways, he's a loving animal. And come here, come on, get everybody. Joe Jeffy and his beautiful purple vest, his winter vest for Christmas. And anyway, that's all I wanted to say for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. And please like and share the video. Please ask questions or make comments on YouTube or in Abbeville when you read what accompanies this video. I try to respond to all your questions and comments. And the reason why I chose this one because of a comment by a viewer about Jefferson's daughters. And I thought, well, it's an interesting comment. Why not do a video? And if you have any suggestions for future videos, I will consider them. Thank you very much. TTFN. I have my beard manager here, and we'll do this next Sunday afternoon if all things go well. TTFN.